So where do the Jewish grandmothers come in?
Yeah. Still waiting.
I thought
that maybe they prepared the meal.
So I didn't mean to leave you hanging. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to People, Parasites, and Plagues, a podcast aimed at delivering information about the fascinating pathogens among us from the scientists who study them. I am David Peterson.
I'm Syd Weigand.
And I am Kim Klonowski, your host for today's episode. Reading will expand your mind, shape your dreams, take you on an adventure, and inspire you to think big.
And scientists working to solve important questions aim to think big. So today we're back talking about books that our listeners might find particularly interesting.
So today we are lucky to have our production assistant, Syd Weigand, joining us.
Hello.
Yes, we always are excited to have you on the program. And actually, we should probably take care of this first, maybe, David, which is this. So Syd has been our production assistant for the past 2 seasons of People's Parasites and Plagues podcast, and we owe her a lot.
Oh, yes. Our gratitude for all the things she does. Other than this episode, most of it behind the scenes, but she does a pre-interview of all our guests, and that is so helpful because we find out things about them that we actually didn't know and would be hard to look up on the interwebs. So,
yeah, give us a big heads up to get to important and interesting things that we may not have known about. So we thank you, and we're going to miss you.
And then, we do need to mention her awesome audio editing skills.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So she makes rooms sound less echoey. And I think she spends several hours removing all the ums that I say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
or the times when I can't stop laughing, when our guests just crack me up. But, so thank you, Syd.
Of course. I've enjoyed it. It's very fun.
We've loved it. We're going to really miss you. So today we're going to talk about 3 books again. We have a great selection, I think, of books that are pretty diverse that we're going to talk about today. So should we draw straws, rock, paper, scissors? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
No one
guinea pig or guinea worm.
Yes. So with that clue, the book I'm going to talk about today it has a great title. It kind of catches you and it makes you wonder what the heck the connection is. The title is New Guinea Tapeworms and Jewish Grandmothers, Tales of Parasites and People. I had never noticed the subtitle there, Parasites and People.
Sounds appropriate.
Yeah. And this is by Robert Desowitz. And Bob Desowitz, he got his doctorate at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And after that, he went to Nigeria to work in the West African Institute for Trypanosomiasis Research. I think he was actually with the British Colonial Medical Research Service at the time, which was kind of a trick since he was actually an American. But somehow, I think it was his advisor who got him the job. And actually, he had thought of going into malaria research. And this was in the late 50s. No, this would have been earlier than that. It was earlier in the 50s. But his advisor said, no, don't go into malaria. You'll be out of a job because we've just about eliminated it. Because we've got DDT, which kills mosquitoes. We've got chloroquine, which kills the parasite. And so you won't have a long career. So he went to Nigeria to work on African trypanosomiasis. After that, he was the chief of parasitology at a lab in Bangkok for a while and then professor at the University of Hawaii.
Oh, wow. What a gig.
Yeah, and so he's spent a lot of time in the field, actually, I think at times representing the WHO. He's written 5 or 6 different books, and this was actually the first one he wrote. It came out in the early 80s. And it has 2 main themes, and I'm just going to open my book here and read from that. One of them is that man-made ecological environmental changes can be responsible for perpetuating and intensifying the majority of infectious diseases. And the second is that control of these infections will follow widespread use of time-honored, sensible approaches to what he calls environmental sanitation. So I think that's just a matter of finding the the niches in the environment where a parasite and or its vector may be hiding. And the book is a collection of vignettes that each illustrate either different diseases or different angles on those two main themes of the book. And I want to mention a couple of them. The first one I find interesting because it's about tractor-induced Japanese encephalitis. And so Japanese encephalitis is a viral disease. It's transmitted by mosquitoes. And this was in, Burma, I believe. And the thinking here is that rice cultivation, of course, is very big there. They grow rice. Traditionally, they've used water buffaloes to prepare the fields and things. But with the advent of mechanized farm equipment, they probably got a grant from somewhere to replace all their water buffalo with tractors. And so there were far fewer water buffalo around. And you may be wondering, how does this bring about an outbreak of Japanese encephalitis? Well, the mosquitoes that were there all the time were vectors for the virus. And their number one favorite host to feed on was the water buffalo. They chose water buffalo over anything.
They're very needy.
They are. They have one snack food, and that's what they stick with. But all of a sudden, there's no water buffaloes. Diesel tractors aren't that tasty. So they move on to the next hosts that are closest and acceptable, which was humans and pigs. And this is where things start compounding because humans can be infected, of course, by the mosquitoes. The pigs can be infected with the virus from the mosquitoes. The pigs are what's called an amplifying host. So the virus replicates like crazy in the pigs. So any mosquitoes that feed on the pigs are guaranteed to pick up the virus. And then their next meal may be from a human, and they've delivered what they picked up from the pig into the human. And so we have an outbreak there. So what started out as a great idea of improving agriculture, improving yields, all of a sudden came with a hidden cost. And that's something that is kind of present throughout the book. Another example was, I think, also Burma. And they had a malaria problem, and it seemed to be due to ponds that they set up. And these ponds were nicely shaded by a plant called water lettuce. I have not looked up to see what that is, but it was a big crop, one of the few that grew really well. So not only could they earn money from it, but they ate that. That was a staple of their diet. And so the experts came in and said, okay, yeah, the problem is that the water lettuce is providing shade that shelters the mosquitoes, so you just need to get rid of all the water lettuce. And the people say, well, we depend on that. This is our income. This is our food. So we'll suffer with the malaria because otherwise we starve. So solutions can have problems, or there can be a conflict between a potential solution and the problems it creates. And one more vignette, which is from the title of the book.
I was wondering if we were to get there.
I'm getting there. Which once again was New Guinea tapeworms and Jewish grandmothers. And of course, the first thing, as I said, that may come to your mind is, what is the connection here? And the connection is tapeworms, two kinds of tapeworms. So in New Guinea, it's a tapeworm called Taenius solium, sometimes called the pork tapeworm, but that's not accurate. It's really a human tapeworm. So humans get infected. They have the tapeworm. They pass eggs. And in areas where you don't have good sanitation facilities, the human feces would be out and about in the environment where pigs could find them and scavenge. The pigs get infected. Larval forms will form what's called cysticerci in their body. And if humans consume pork that's undercooked, the humans get infected, and that kind of completes the cycle. If that was all there was to it, it would be kind of gross, but not too much of a big medical problem. The problem is when there's poor sanitation and humans come into contact with eggs in human feces, the larvae and the eggs try to find the organs where they want to encyst, but they can't because they don't have a roadmap for a human. They only know how to find this in a pig. So they often inadvertently end up in the brain, forming these large fluid-filled cysts, and you have neurological issues. And in New Guinea, it was first discovered when there was a strange epidemic of burn victims in a particular village. And this part of Papua New Guinea can get pretty cold. People live communally in large huts, beds around the circumference, and a big fire in the middle to keep them warm. And these people had all stumbled out of bed and into the fire. And at autopsy on one of the patients, they found his brain just riddled with these tapeworm larvae.
Holy cow.
And this is not a problem they'd ever had before, but it came down to a gift of pigs from the president of Indonesia that, unbeknownst to them, were infected with this, and that introduced the pork tapeworm into this area where it was a combination of not good hygiene facilities. Mm-hmm. And then also, when they cooked a pig, it was kind of just to bring it up a little to the warm end of room temperature and then eat it. And so, cooking completely would have killed the worms, but they didn't do that. And this was their custom. It was kind of a ritual to celebrate things. And he relates in the book that, talking to the chieftain, he said, "What are we to do if a baby is born at midnight? We must celebrate. We have to sacrifice a pig, eat it right away. There's no time to cook it." And it's their cultures and practices come into conflict with what the outside malaria, or not malaria, but the outside parasite and health experts tell them to do. And I think in that case, tradition and, your routine practices will always win out.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating.
So where do the Jewish grandmothers come in?
Yeah. Still waiting.
I thought
that maybe they prepared the meal.
So I didn't mean to leave you hanging. That kind of worked out well, I think. So the Jewish grandmothers getting infected with tapeworms happened in New York City, but the story really starts in Scandinavia, where fishermen on the lakes there would go out on the lakes. If they need to defecate while they're out there, I guess they just do it right over the side into the lake. And once again, another tapeworm. In this case, the ideal host is not humans. It's a fish tapeworm that can grow to be 45 feet long. I don't know what kind of fish they're fishing for. But on top of that, people can get infected by it because the Norwegians make something similar to sashimi, which is just prepared raw fish. And so the larval forms in the fish can infect humans, and then they'll pass the eggs, which then go back to the fish. A lot of Scandinavians, when they came to the U.S., when they immigrated, moved to Minnesota and Wisconsin and took up their old work. They were fishermen in the lakes there, and very productive and profitable fishermen. And they'd sell their wares all over the Northeast, including New York City. And a good nice old Jewish grandmother would go to the market and get fish and come home and make something called gefilte fish, which is kind of a minced fish pressed into a ball that you then boil it. And you'd probably thinking at this point that, well, if you're boiling it, that's got to kill the worm larva. And it will, but traditional grandmothers didn't cook according to a cookbook or a thermometer. So what they would be doing is pulling one out, pinching off a little bit, tasting it, see if it seems done yet, putting it back in. And so they're getting this undercooked minced fish that had the larva in it. So we have two completely different parts of the world, two different worms that can infect people kind of because they're customs and practices. Fortunately, in the U.S., we figured out what it was, and there were fish inspections, and then the older Jewish grandmothers gave rise or, passed this on to a younger set of cooks who used thermometers to test for deadness. But I really like the way he you can draw comparisons between New York City and Papua New Guinea, and some of the issues are the same.
Cool. That is pretty cool. I need to stop cooking like that then. That's what I do too. I pull off little bits.
So the book that I chose is called Everything is Tuberculosis. You may have heard about this book. It's actually a New York Times bestseller list book right now. And the author of the book is John Green. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the author because I think it's an important context to understand why this book is hopefully as good as I think it is. So John Green is a author of young adult fiction. I think he's most popularly known for the book The Fault in Our Stars. He has written many books that I have not read. I believe, have you read any of his books?
He was huge when I was in middle school.
Okay.
I've read all of his young adult books.
So tell me if this rings true. What I have read is that many of his books emphasize human relationships.
Yes.
And human connection and empathy. And often, obviously, as a young adult author, there's a teen protagonist.
Always.
Which there is actually in this book as well, which is why I bring it up. I do want to mention before we get started, because David is already making fun of me, that I actually listened to this book as an audiobook. And I think it's important to mention that. And I think you should actually, if you are going to read this book, actually listen to it. I'm going to advocate for that because John Green himself is the person who narrates the book. So, and
just to be clear, I was not going to bring it up.
Okay. That's fine. That's fine. But I think it's just important because it's very clear. I did not realize, because Syd maybe will tell us that she follows him on social media, that he is actually very passionate about this topic. And you can really hear that in his narration of the book. So I think it's really important to listen to the book. So I mentioned this kind of because I think it's very important the way that he approaches this topic. This is not a hardcore science book. I want to say that right off the top. It has very important messages and, of course, gives you what you need to know about tuberculosis. But I think, again, it's a good story. And I was trying to figure out because I couldn't remember, so I looked up some of this. So I guess John Green has lots of YouTube channels, runs lots of different enterprises. And over the course of time, I'm not sure exactly how this started, he really got involved with a lot of health initiatives. So at one point, and he's been an advocate for global health for a long time, I think since like 2010 maybe. But one of the initiatives that he has become a part of had to deal with a nonprofit called Partners in Health. And the goal of this nonprofit was to decrease maternal mortality in Sierra Leone. So he, I think as part of this initiative, was actually in Sierra Leone, touring some of the hospitals to see what this group was doing and kind of see the problem firsthand. And as he was touring these hospitals, someone said to him, "Would you like to see a TB hospital?" So this was in 2019, so not very long ago. He went there, and as he was touring this hospital, he was really shocked about how sick some of these patients were, how they were emaciated, not something you see as someone from the West, right? You just don't see patients who have this kind of illness. And what is important to kind of get back to John Green and how he writes is he met this young person named Henry, who, when he met him, he thought he was about 9 years old. But come to find out, he's actually 16. His growth had been stunted because he had been living with TB for a very long time. He thought he was actually maybe, I don't think I'm giving away because this is really in the opening of the book. He thought he maybe was the child of a worker at the hospital or something like that. And then come to find out he was a patient who had been living in the hospital for many years. And what makes this story so great is, he develops this relationship with this person and he kind of weaves Henry's journey throughout the book. So he has this kind of young protagonist, just like he does in his fiction books, that he kind of brings us back to as the story continues to be told. And where I think that also goes back to John Green's books is he really makes that emotional connection for the reader with this person, right, and what they're going through. So, and again, really important for us because we just don't see people who have tuberculosis. So the book itself kind of gives us that connection. Okay, so what else do I want to say about this book? Okay, so the human connection, he talks about this a lot. But he also talks about how the disease has impacted culture, historical events, lots of things like that. Again, not super scientific, but it really important about talking about TB in things like literature and how the disease was actually romanticized by many authors who had tuberculosis, which I think was fairly interesting. He also talks about the sanatoriums in the United States that were around for a long time and how people would kind of go out west, and stay in these places and get the fresh air and hopefully become better.
That's what the Doc Holliday did.
Ah, there's some other stories too.
That's why he went out west.
Yeah. So there's some really interesting fun facts about some things that maybe developed from some people maybe in their journey out west. But one thing I mentioned to someone about the sanitariums and TB that I found out, fun fact for people in the room, that we actually had a sanitarium in Athens, Georgia.
No way.
Yes. So it was called the Fairhaven Sanatorium, and it opened in 1926. It had 30 beds, and it is actually known today as the clubhouse at Sandy Creek Park. I'm sorry, not Sandy Creek Park. Sorry, edit. It is the clubhouse at Memorial Park. So yeah, very close to the university.
gosh.
Yeah. So it was as I mentioned, a 30-person bed that only operated, I think, for maybe about 10 years. And then they moved the operation out of Athens. But again, he really, and it's not just fun facts and talking about TB in history. He also really emphasizes the fact that we have, around 3 million, that this disease has been with us for about 3 million years. And we still have about 1.5 million people who are dying from tuberculosis every year. And there's tons of people who are living with various forms of the disease, whether it be active, chronic, lots of things like that. But again, I don't want to give away all the fun facts or anything, but there were a couple of things that I really enjoyed learning about some people who came in and tried to help to come to a solution or a therapy for the disease. One is again, not giving away everything, is a famous detective author. He was a contemporary of Robert Koch, and he used, this maybe will be your clue, deductive reasoning to disprove Koch's claim, for a cure. So maybe you'll figure that out. But again, the main point was this is an important disease, and he feels very passionate about talking about TB and about how many people are infected despite the fact that we've had a cure for a very long time. And he really emphasizes that. We've had drugs around since the 1950s that can cure the disease. But we have so many people who are living with this, emphasizing things like, a quarter of all humans are infected with TB, but it's still a problem. And he really also spends a lot of time talking about and mentioning this quote, which I think is important to mention, is that the cure is where there's no disease and disease is where there is no cure. So the idea is that we have a lot of treatment disparities, right? So medicine's expensive, testing is very expensive. He also talks a lot about the fact that, there's a lot of multi-drug resistance, and to determine that you have to do testing. And if you have a case that's a multi-drug resistant, but you don't know because you haven't done the test, then you could be treating with somebody with a drug that's not going to do anything, right? So the person doesn't get any better. It also reduces the faith in the rest of the population of taking a drug. So he talks a lot about systemic problems with delivering cures across the world and getting medicine into the right people. And he's really a big advocate in this book for even us, getting involved with advocacy and trying to get drug companies, for example, to lower drug costs, lowering testing costs, things that, he, I believe, is continuing to do through a lot of his efforts, which I think is really important. I think he's written some op-eds on TB. So I don't think this is a hobby for him. I think he seems to be very passionate about trying to get people involved and increasing awareness, which I think this book will really do. I really do. And I think the reason why I loved it, and this is kind of where I'll end, is I don't read a lot of nonfiction. I really don't. I don't read a lot of science books. I think part of it is that, some people like to read all the time in the area that they work in. Other people have the kind of opposite approach where they don't want to read about it so much. They want to kind of, that's me, just get lost in fiction. But this was really a book that held my attention, and I really wanted to, I don't want to say read, I'll say listen to it. And I think it's because of his storytelling approach. It just really roped you in. It was easy to read. It was not bogged down with a lot of scientific, nomenclature or things that he didn't easily explain to the reader/listener. It's also, I think it's just very accessible to be, bottom line. it was also not this real thick tome. I mean, it was like 200 pages if you were to actually read it. But if you listened to it, it was 5.5 hours, which isn't too bad. I listened to it on a ride to Charlotte on the way back, and I was done. But I think this is a great book for TB and for public health and bringing awareness, particularly to areas that don't see TB very often or at all, of course, here in the United States. So I think it may be important to kind of maintain that awareness to really try to help people in other places and consider these impediments and how we can maybe improve that for the health of other people. So I really enjoyed it.
It sounds like, first of all, I'm really fascinated with the book. I'm going to have to get that on my list and maybe even move it to the top of the pile. But one thing that Everything is Tuberculosis and the New Guinea tapeworm book seem to have in common is that they focus not so much on the disease, but on a story involving people. So they look at the human angle and through that introduce things about the science about the parasites. There's probably a little more science in the tapeworm book written by a card-carrying parasitologist.
Yeah, I would probably imagine. But I think it's just great. I mean, it holds your attention, right? I mean, to have a book about tuberculosis on the, New York Times top 10 selling book list or whatever it is, 25, that takes a lot, right, from the general public. And it's not just the scientists buying it. So I think he's obviously is hitting a good audience.
Well, actually, my wife and I have a road trip coming up, so maybe I will get
There you go.
the audio book.
Okay, you should do it. Okay, Syd, you're up.
Alrighty. Well, my book was also very accessible. The reason for that being that it is a children's book, and they gave this to me because that is the highest reading level that I'm capable of.
That is not true. We were trying to be kind during the end of your semester.
They were trying to make it so I didn't have too much to do during finals, which I appreciated. So my book was Malaria by Mary Bates. It was a pretty standard run-of-the-mill nonfiction book about malaria, and it was broken into 3 different parts. So the first part was the history behind it, which was actually very interesting, and I didn't know a lot of those facts. I think one of the things it says is that malaria is mentioned in a Chinese document from 2700 BCE, which I thought was pretty cool. I did not know that we have documentation of it that is that old. And then I also, this is very fun, the name malaria comes from the Italian words for bad air because the Romans thought it was caused by bad air rising from the swamps. So I thought that was kind of, and they're almost right.
They are.
They're almost right there.
It's the mosquitoes arising from the swamps.
They're so close. And I think, so that belief lasted for 2,000 years. So it's another Galen type of situation with the humors. So a lot of that history stuff was pretty cool. It went into the science of it next, which I'm sure if you have been listening to the show, you know what malaria is and what it does inside the human body. So I don't think I need to go too far into that. And then the last section was treatment and prevention, really just stressing that the best treatment is prevention, but then also if we do need to treat it, here's the kinds of drugs we have. So we've got the chloroquine, which is a synthetic version of a chemical from the chin-chin tree.
Yeah.
And then there was also a story about a Chinese scientist named Yu Tu, who actually found a new treatment for it by parsing through ancient Chinese documents, which was really cool. And so they found this old remedy for fever, and they tried a couple of them out. And it turns out that the leaves of sweet wormwood plant that have been used by Chinese herbalists for thousands of years are actually effective against malaria. So they were onto something. So that's pretty cool. So it goes over a couple of treatment options like that. And then it talked about, mosquito nets, insecticide, all that good stuff. And overall, it was just a nice little supplementary read. So I think it might not be, most of our listeners might not be the target demographic for this, but if you have kids, then you should definitely have them read this. And
Especially if they're interested in infectious diseases. Yes. Which kid is not?
yeah.
Germs.
Well, they are interested
They are.
in the zombie virus and the zombie fungus.
That is true.
So,
There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it is interesting, these treatments that I guess back in the day, people would just chew on things and then they would get relief. And then it just became documented. And then someone said, well, so-and-so over here didn't get malaria and they've been chewing on that tree, I guess.
it's all trial and error.
It's kind of fascinating how this is early science.
It's kind of funny because my friends and I were at trivia the other night, and one of the questions was what country invented paper money. And we made a joke about if you ever have a question about who invented whatever old thing, it's China. The answer is China. And that holds true even in medicine.
I do find it fascinating that the approach she took was to look back in really old documents. And I suspect that she found a lot of cures for fever, but fever is somewhat nonspecific, and I'm sure she went carefully through them one by one, testing them, and found that one of them was a hit. So
That's tedious.
yeah. And we should mention that she won the Nobel Prize for her work.
She did.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, that was my book. It was a good read.
So what age group do you think it would be a best fit for?
Oh, so I haven't interacted with a child in years. So I would say anywhere from kindergarten to 5th grade.
Oh, really?
That's my ballpark.
So I think there's probably niche
That's true.
kids, maybe, who probably have parents that are scientists at very young that might want to read about this.
Or historians?
Or just kids whose parents say, you shouldn't read that. You're not old enough to read it. Then those kids will want to read it. So, that was fun.
This is our second book episode.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I foresee more.
definitely.
As always, we appreciate you tuning in today. And if this is your first time listening to the People, Parasites, and Plagues podcast, we encourage you to check out the other exciting episodes launched last season. Please rate the podcast, and if you have any questions or suggestions for future episodes, reach out to us via email at ppp@uga.edu. This podcast is brought to you by the Faculty of Infectious Diseases and the Grady College of Journalism at the University of Georgia. It is supported by the University of Georgia through the Office of Research, the UGA Graduate School, and the College of Veterinary Medicine. Special thanks to our production assistant, Syd Weigand, for research, editing, scheduling, and keeping us on track.